The Central Archive of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation holds a document that recorded a fundamental change in the military command and control system at a critical stage of the 1942 campaign. This is the authentic copy of Order Number 227 of the People's Commissar of Defense of the USSR, dated July 28, 1942. The document is printed on standard sheets of high-density gray paper, bears the signature of People's Commissar of Defense Joseph Stalin, and is marked "Not for Publication." The margins contain pencil notes by staff of the Operations Directorate of the General Staff, recording the exact time the directive was sent via Bodo telegraph machines to the addresses of the front headquarters. 0 hours 45 minutes on July 29th. The physical condition of the archival sheet indicates its intensive use in the field. The edges are frayed, and there are creases from being folded into quarters, which is characteristic of documents that were directly in the map cases of liaison officers. This order appeared at a time when the depth of the Soviet retreat on the southern flank of the Soviet-German front had reached critical levels following the abandonment of Rostov-on-Don on July 24, 1942. Please subscribe to this channel. Your subscription is crucial for the development of the project and allows us to continue detailed work with archival sources. The operational strategic situation by the summer of 1942 was determined by the results of the Kharkov defensive-offensive operation of May of the same year. The defeat of the forces of the Southwestern Front under the command of Marshal Semyon Timoshenko led to the liquidation of the shock groups comprising the 6th and 57th Armies, as well as parts of the 9th Army. Irreversible personnel losses exceeded 270,000 people. More than 5,000 guns and mortars were lost, along with about 1,000 tanks. This created a deep gap in the defensive line of the Soviet troops stretching over 300 kilometers. The German command, as part of the implementation of Plan Blue, deployed Army Group B under the command of Colonel General Maximilian von Weichs, and Army Group A under the command of Field Marshal Wilhelm List. The main blow was delivered by the forces of Friedrich Paulus's 6th Army and Hermann Hoth's 4th Panzer Army. The economic potential of the temporarily lost territories constituted a significant share of the overall balance of the USSR. By July 1942, the Soviet Union had lost regions that, before the war, provided 32% of the gross grain harvest, 45% of the livestock population, and up to 50% of steel and rolled metal production. Railway logistics were in a critical state. The capacity of the Balashov-Kamushin line was only 12 pairs of trains per day, which did not meet the needs for the timely delivery of reserves for the forming Stalingrad front. At the Likaya and Povorino stations, over 80 trains with materiel had accumulated due to a shortage of locomotives and the destruction of communication hubs from airstrikes by the Luftwaffe's 4th Air Fleet. The density of artillery coverage per linear meter of the defensive lines of the 62nd and 64th Armies on the outer contour of Stalingrad by the end of July did not exceed 2.5 guns per kilometer of front, making it impossible to create a continuous zone of barrage fire against the enemy's armored spearheads. The normative structure of Order Number 227 mandated the immediate introduction of strict administrative and disciplinary measures. The document demanded the elimination of retreatist sentiments among the troops and the removal from their posts of Army and Corps commanders who had permitted an unauthorized withdrawal without an order from higher command. To practically implement this task, it was ordered to form within each front from 1 to 3 penal battalions, each with a strength of 800 men. These units were intended for the assignment of middle and senior command, commanding, and political personnel who had shown instability in battle. Within each army, it was ordered to form from 5 to 10 penal companies, each with a strength of 150 to 200 men, to which rank-and-file soldiers and junior commanders were assigned. The term of service in penal units was set from 1 to 3 months, or until the first wound or the performance of a combat feat. Simultaneously, the institution of barrier troops was introduced. The order obligated the formation within each army of from 3 to 5 well-armed barrier detachments, each with a strength of up to 200 men. Their location was designated as the immediate rear of unstable divisions. The barrier detachments were given the task, in the event of panic and disorderly retreat of units, to detain panic mongers and eliminate on the spot the instigators of flight, thereby assisting honest soldiers in fulfilling their duty to the motherland. The table of organization and material support for these formations was regulated by separate directives from the Directorate for the Formation and Manning of the Red Army. The permanent staff of the penal battalions, which included the battalion commander, commissar, and company and platoon commanders, was filled with career, combat-experienced, and politically reliable officers. Officers of the permanent staff received an increased salary, and 1 month of service counted as 3 months of service length for pension calculation. The variable contingent, the penal soldiers, were deprived of military ranks, orders, and medals for the period of their stay in the unit. Family allowances were not paid to them, and their monetary allowance was transferred at the minimum rate of a first-year rank-and-file soldier, amounting to 8 rubles 50 kopecks per month. The armament of penal companies consisted predominantly of light small arms, Mosin 3-line rifles model 1891/1930, and Spagen submachine guns, PPSH-41. Heavy weapons, such as Maxim heavy machine guns or battalion mortars, were issued to penal units only for the period of performing specific assault tasks to break through enemy fortified defensive lines. The barrier detachments had a different structure. Their personnel were formed from servicemen of NKVD troops, or vetted army units. The armament of a standard 200-man barrier detachment consisted of 12 Maxim heavy machine guns, 24 Degtyarev light machine guns, DP-27, Tokarev automatic rifles, AVT-40, and submachine guns. Transport support included from 3 to 5 GAZ-AA or ZIS-5 trucks to ensure high mobility when deploying to threatened rear areas. The Chronicle of Actions and statistical analysis of the functioning of barrier troops and penal units during the period from August to October 1942 was recorded in the regular reports of the Directorate of Special Departments of the NKVD of the USSR under the leadership of Commissar of State Security of the Third Rank, Viktor Abakumov. According to a report dated October 15, 1942, addressed to the State Defense Committee from the issuance of Order Number 227 until the specified date, all barrier troops of the active armies had detained 140,755 servicemen who had fallen behind their units or fled from the front. Of this number of detainees, 3,980 individuals were arrested. 118,974 individuals were returned to their units or sent to transit points. 10,201 individuals were sent to penal companies, and 1,856 individuals were sent to penal battalions. By verdicts of military tribunals and on the orders of commanders directly at the place of detention, 1,189 individuals were subjected to the highest measure of punishment in connection with panic-mongering and desertion. The statistical ratio shows that the measure of liquidation on the spot was applied to less than 1% of the total number of detained persons, while the main mass of personnel, more than 84%, was returned to regular units after identity verification, document checks, and reorganization. The first discrepancy in archival sources is revealed when comparing the combat logs of formations of the Stalingrad front and the operational reports of the Special Department of the NKVD of the front for August 1942. The documents of the headquarters of the 57th Army indicate that during the period from August 10th to 15th, in the area south of Krasnoarmeysk, the Army's units held their positions without cases of unauthorized withdrawal. However, in the report of the Special Department of this same Army dated August 16th, the detention by Barrier Detachment No. 4 of two groups of servicemen totaling 240 individuals from the 15th Guards Rifle Division is recorded. They had left their positions in the area of the 74th kilometer siding under enemy mortar fire. This discrepancy is explained by the specifics of record-keeping. Army headquarters often recorded only the general front line based on reports from division commanders who sought to conceal local pockets of panic, while state security organs recorded the physical flow of individuals moving in the rear area, regardless of the administrative boundaries of formations. On the Stalingrad front, in August 1942, barrier troops carried out tasks not only of filtering retreating personnel, but also of the direct defense of key logistical points. On August 23, 1942, the 14th Panzer Corps of the Wehrmacht, under the command of General Gustav von Wietersheim, broke through the defenses of the Soviet 4th Tank Army at the junction with the 62nd Army and reached the Volga in the area of the settlements of Rynok and Erzovka. On that day, combat operations unfolded in the area of the northern outskirts of Stalingrad, near the tractor factory, in which the barrier troops of the 62nd Army took part. A detachment under the command of Captain Pavel Zaitsev, together with a workers' militia battalion, took up positions on the line of the Machetka River. According to the report of the head of the Special Department of the 62nd Army, Senior Major of State Security Nikolai Selivanovsky, the barrier detachment held back attacks by the motorized infantry of the enemy's 60th Motorized Division for 11 hours. During this battle, the detachment's personnel expended their magazine supply of 7.62 mm caliber cartridges in the amount of 45,000 rounds. The detachment's losses amounted to 42 personnel put out of action. Machine gun fire was used exclusively against advancing enemy formations, as there were no regular Soviet troops in front of the detachment's positions on this sector. The second discrepancy and systemic planning error are revealed when analyzing the preamble of Order Number 227 itself. The text of the order states that German troops, following their winter retreat of 1941 to 1942, created 100 penal companies and about a dozen penal battalions to restore discipline. A study of captured documents from the command of the German Army, OKH, shows that the Soviet General Staff possessed inaccurate intelligence data on the organizational structure of the Wehrmacht's punitive bodies. The German Army did not have a simultaneous network of 100 penal companies. The Wehrmacht's disciplinary system relied on so-called probation units, Bewährungstruppen, represented by the 500 series battalions, 91st, 541st, 561st, 561st separate battalions, as well as field penal camps, Feldstrafgefangenenabteilungen, which were subordinate not to divisional commands, but directly to the commandant's offices of Army Group rear areas. 3 battalions of the 999 series, which began forming later, were also operational. The error in the Soviet order was caused by the fact that Soviet military intelligence classified any German units operating in particularly dangerous sectors under the command of military police officers, Feldgendarmerie, as separate penal companies, artificially inflating their total number in official documents to create a significant precedent for justifying the harshness of their own measures. A comparative analysis of Soviet and German punitive measures reveals fundamental differences in legal mechanisms and methods of application. In the Wehrmacht, disciplinary punishments and assignment to penal units were regulated by the German Military Penal Code, Militärstrafgesetzbuch, of 1940, and Hitler's orders, including the famous Hold Fast Order, Haltebefehl, of December 16, 1941. The German system of punitive measures was built on the principle of judicial proceedings through a network of divisional and army courts, Kriegsgerichte. In Soviet practice, as established by Order Number 227, the judicial procedure for assignment to a penal unit was maximally simplified. A division commander had the right, by his personal order, to send a serviceman of enlisted or junior command rank to a penal company without the sanction of a military tribunal. Sending an officer to a penal battalion required an order at the corps or army level. German field gendarmes and traffic control service, Streifendienst, posts at road intersections had the right to use deadly force in the rear zone only in the case of open armed mutiny or clear physical resistance during arrest. Soviet barrier troops, Zagradotriady, received the right to extrajudicial liquidation of panic-mongers directly on the battlefield, which was an administrative decision by an extraordinary control body, dictated by the loss of troop control. Meanwhile, the scale of application of the supreme penalty in German troops for the entire war period, according to official German archive data, amounted to between 15 and 20,000 people who received death sentences by court, whereas in the Red Army, according to tribunal sentences for the entire period of hostilities, more than 135,000 death sentences were carried out, reflecting a higher degree of harshness in internal control policy. Critical analysis of command decisions through the lens of the 1939 Red Army Field Manual, PU-39, indicates that the deployment of barrier troops was an attempt to compensate for failures in organizing tactical communications and reconnaissance. Article 212 of the 1939 Field Manual stated that defense must be stubborn, active, and sustained to the last possibility, and that unauthorized withdrawal was a crime. However, the manual did not provide algorithms for action in situations of complete loss of command and control. When division headquarters lost wire communication with regiments during the initial hours of enemy artillery preparation, and Type 5-AK radios were disabled by shrapnel. Barrier troops were deployed at a distance of 1.5 to 3 kilometers from the front line, predominantly at defiles, bridges, crossings, and road junctions. This created a situation where the barrier detachments were cut off from the information flow from the front. They lacked data on whether a battalion's withdrawal was an unauthorized route or a sanctioned maneuver ordered by the regimental commander, who had failed to relay the information to adjacent units due to the breakdown of messenger services. A third topographical and tactical planning error was recorded in the actions of the 64th Army in the Don River Bend in mid-August 1942. The Army Command positioned the 3rd Barrier Detachment on the approaches to the crossing at Kalak-na-Donu, without accounting for the terrain configuration and the direction of the dominant heights. The detachment was deployed on an open lowland plain, which was raked by fire from the heights of the left bank, occupied by artillery observation posts of the enemy's 14th Panzer Corps. During the withdrawal of units of the 98th Rifle Division, which had lost command and control, the barrier detachment attempted to establish a defensive line facing west. Due to the lack of tank support and a shortage of anti-tank rifles, PTRD, the detachment was completely dispersed within 2 hours by the forward patrols of the Wehrmacht's 16th Panzer Division. The detachment suffered 160 personnel casualties, and it failed to accomplish any of its tasks related to gathering and filtering retreating soldiers. This episode demonstrates that using barrier troops as line infantry in conditions of a dynamic enemy armored breakthrough led to their swift elimination without achieving any operational effect. The activities of penal units on the Stalingrad front were characterized by high-intensity assault actions. The first separate penal battalion of the Stalingrad front, formed in August 1942 under the command of Major Stepan Tsigankov, was employed in the battles for the city center in September. The battalion was tasked with recapturing key defensive strongpoints: the Stalingrad 1 railway station, the water tower, and residential sectors within the operational zone of Alexander Rodimtsev's 13th Guards Rifle Division. The specific nature of their deployment was that the penal battalion was thrown into attacks against prepared enemy strongpoints without preliminary engineer reconnaissance of minefields and explosives. In the fighting from September 15th to 20th, 1942, the battalion's personnel suffered losses exceeding 70% of its original strength. Out of 740 variable personnel, 518 were incapacitated by wounds or fell in battle. However, the combat mission of holding the station square was accomplished, which allowed the headquarters of the 62nd Army to gain 48 hours for the crossing of the material part of Colonel Nikolai Batyuk's 284th Rifle Division across the Volga. These facts confirm that penal units were used as an expendable tool for solving critical tactical tasks in conditions of a shortage of linear reserves. The evolution of the use of barrier troops during the shift in strategic initiative in late 1942 led to a transformation of their functions. After the start of the Soviet counteroffensive, Operation Uranus, on November 19, 1942, and the encirclement of Paulus's Sixth Army, the intensity of defensive battles in the rear of the Soviet troops sharply decreased. The primary task of the barrier detachments became not suppressing panic, but guarding communications, eliminating small encircled enemy groups attempting to break out of the pocket, and collecting captured property. According to a circular from the Main Directorate of Barrier Troops, dated December 20, 1942, personnel were ordered to organize round-the-clock patrols of roads up to 15 kilometers behind the front line, inspect all types of motor vehicles for the illegal removal of food and fuel and lubricants, and detain suspicious individuals lacking movement orders signed by the chiefs of staff of divisions or armies. Thus, the punitive disciplinary function gave way to garrison and counterintelligence service. The material and technical consequences of issuing Order Number 227 were twofold. On the one hand, the introduction of penal units made it possible to return a significant amount of trained human resources to the front. According to archival data from the Troop Manpower Directorate, 427,910 people passed through penal formations during their entire existence from 1942 to 1945. This is equivalent to the strength of approximately 43 regiment rifle divisions. The return to the ranks of experienced commanders who had redeemed their guilt through wounds, partially alleviated the acute personnel shortage at the primary level of command, in the positions of platoon and company commanders, where personnel losses were highest. On the other hand, the creation of an extensive network of barrier detachments diverted a significant amount of automatic weapons and scarce motor transport from direct participation in combat operations at the front. By October 1942, about 190 Army barrier detachments were operating in the Red Army, with a total strength of over 38,000 people. This number of personnel, equipped according to the tables of organization of Guards units and supplied with automatic weapons, exceeded the entire grouping of Soviet troops defending the immediate city limits of Stalingrad during the most critical period of the assault. The dry result and statistical verification of the application of Order Number 227 demonstrate its pragmatic focus. The instruments introduced by the order were not a unique invention of the Soviet system, but represented an adaptation of the historical experience of waging total war under conditions of a deep crisis in supply and management. The order marked a rejection of liberal methods of manpower allocation and shifted the Army onto the tracks of strict administrative subordination, where the price of an individual soldier's life was subordinated to the task of holding key geographical and industrial areas. The country's logistical potential, which was on the verge of collapse in the summer of 1942, was stabilized through the extreme intensification of human resource utilization. The decrease in the rate of the troops' retreat by November 1942 and the subsequent success of the strategic defensive operation at Stalingrad were achieved, among other factors, through the creation of a strict filtration barrier in the rear, which eliminated the possibility of an uncontrolled collapse of the front akin to the campaigns of the summer of 1941. Order Number 227 fulfilled its technical task of stabilizing the defensive formations, becoming an element of the system of total mobilization of the state, where punitive measures acted as a mandatory regulator of executive discipline. The total number of individuals who passed through penal units amounted to less than 4% of the total number mobilized into the ranks of the Red Army during the war, which refutes the thesis about the mass replacement of regular troops with penal formations. The main burden of holding defensive lines and conducting offensive operations remained with regular rifle, tank, and artillery formations, whose supply and replenishment were carried out through the standard logistical channels of the General Staff. The barrier troops were officially disbanded by order of the People's Commissar of Defense, number 0413, on October 29, 1944, due to a fundamental change in the operational situation at the front and the shift of combat operations to the territory of Eastern European countries, where the tasks of maintaining discipline required different administrative legal mechanisms. This concludes the detailed analysis of archival materials on Order Number 227.